June 6, 1944, 0148 hours, Sainte-Mère-Église, Normandy. Unteroffizier Heinrich Vogel stood motionless in the church square, his Mauser K98k rifle slung across his shoulder. The night was starless, thick with clouds that promised rain but delivered none. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not the distant rumble of Allied bombers heading inland. Not the sporadic crack of coastal artillery. This was different, steady, mechanical, growing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Vogel stepped away from the stone wall of the church where his machine gun nest commanded the intersection of 3 roads. He tilted his head skyward, listening. The roar swelled, drowning out the nervous chatter of his squad. Hundreds of engines, no, thousands. The air itself seemed to vibrate. And then the clouds tore open. Dark shapes materialized against the black sky. Parachutes, dozens, then hundreds, blossomed like ghost flowers in the darkness. Vogel's breath caught in his throat. One paratrooper snagged on a tree branch 15 meters away, his harness tangling in the limbs. Another crashed through a tiled roof into the bakery across the square. A third hit the cobblestones hard, rolled, and came up firing. In 90 seconds, the town Heinrich Vogel's company had occupied for 4 years was no longer German. By dawn, Sainte-Mère-Église was under American control. Not after days of artillery bombardment, not after weeks of grinding infantry assault. It had been seized in a single night by men who fell from the sky like avenging angels. At 06:22 hours, Vogel raised his hands in surrender. He was one of 17 from his platoon who survived that night. During interrogation by Captain Thomas Brennan of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, Vogel kept repeating the same phrase in broken English. "You fall from sky. How we fight men who fall from sky." This question, like a contagion, spread through German defensive lines from Normandy to the Rhine. By the end of June 1944, Wehrmacht commanders understood with cold clarity they faced something they could not replicate. Something for which they had no adequate defense. American airborne operations had rewritten the fundamental logic of warfare. But the story of these sky soldiers did not begin in America. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The concept of soldiers dropping from the sky did not originate in the United States. It was born in the Soviet Union. In 1930, near Moscow, hundreds of Red Army troops leapt from Tupolev TB-3 bombers during the world's first large-scale paratrooper exercise. Foreign observers were stunned by the display. Among those taking particular interest were the Germans, who recognized its potential and began their own experiments. By 1940, Germany's Fallschirmjägers, elite airborne troops, had turned the idea into a weapon of war. On May 10, 1940, they executed one of the most daring assaults in modern military history. 78 German paratroopers landed directly atop Fort Eben-Emael in Belgium, a fortress once deemed impregnable. Armed with flamethrowers and hollow-charge explosives, they silenced its massive guns and subdued 1,200 defenders in less than a day. The operation stunned Europe. To the French and British, it was terrifying. To American planners, it was fascinating. In June 1940, U.S. Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall ordered the creation of a small parachute test platoon. The budget was meager and the equipment improvised, but the goal was audacious: to create a force capable of descending from the skies to strike anywhere, anytime. Fort Benning, Georgia, became the birthplace of American airborne warfare. On August 16, 1940, 48 volunteers climbed into Douglas C-33 transports for the first official U.S. Army parachute jump. Some were pale, others trembling. Few could have imagined they were opening an entirely new chapter in military history. Lieutenant William T. Lee, who supervised the test, quickly emerged as the visionary behind the new arm. Appointed commander of the 501st Parachute Battalion later that year, he preached a radical creed. We are a new breed of soldier. We do not arrive by road. We do not arrive by sea. We arrive by air, and we arrive to win. Training was brutal and uncompromising. Recruits completed 8 jumps, 4 by day, 4 by night, and endured relentless physical drills, forced marches, and close combat training. More than 40% washed out. Those who remained earned the silver jump wings and a swagger unmatched elsewhere in the Army. German intelligence took note, but dismissed the effort. A 1940 Abwehr report described the U.S. airborne experiment as limited in scope and negligible in threat. That misjudgment would later cost Germany dearly. By December 1941, America fielded 4 operational parachute battalions. 1 year later, it had 2 full airborne divisions, the 82nd and the 101st. And by mid-1944, 5 entire divisions stood ready, with more than 60,000 jump-qualified soldiers. The growth astonished even American commanders. Major General Matthew Ridgway, who led the 82nd, faced the monumental task of building and training an entire division for a kind of warfare no one had ever attempted on such a scale. Ridgway established doctrines that defined U.S. airborne operations for decades. Every paratrooper learned not only his own job, but that of his leader and sergeant. Each man carried extra ammunition because resupply after landing was uncertain. Training assumed they would be scattered and isolated behind enemy lines. They learned to fight alone and to win. Early parachutes often failed, radios shattered, and weapon bundles broke on landing. Each failure led to innovation. By 1943, American paratroopers junked with reliable T-5 parachutes, reinforced equipment containers, and sturdy SCR-300 radios for coordination after landing. Meanwhile, Germany's top airborne commander, General Meyer Kurt Student, watched with growing alarm. After the devastating losses on Crete in 1941, over 4,000 German paratroopers killed in one campaign, Germany had largely abandoned large-scale airborne operations. The Americans, however, were moving in the opposite direction. Abwehr reports throughout 1943 warned of new U.S. divisions forming monthly. Student understood the strategic danger. The United States was building the capacity to drop an entire army from the sky. Central to that capability was the Douglas C-47 Skytrain, the workhorse of U.S. airborne forces. By June 4, 1944, the 9th Troop Carrier Command had nearly 1,200 C-47s, enough to transport 3 full airborne divisions at once. Fighter escorts and dedicated air support units made the airborne arm a self-sustaining force. Germany could never match this scale. While the Reich had trained 22,000 Fallschirmjägers in 4 years, America had trained nearly 3 times as many paratroopers in less than 3. Yet numbers told only part of the story. The American philosophy of airborne warfare differed profoundly from Germany's. The Fallschirmjägers were designed for surgical strikes, capture an airfield or bridge, then hold until relieved. U.S. paratroopers were trained to seize and defend large swaths of territory, cut communications, and fight independently for days or even weeks. Brigadier General James M. Gavin, commander of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment, put it simply, "We are not raiders. We are infantry that arrives in an extraordinary way. Our mission is not confusion, it is victory."
By the summer of 1943, as the Allies prepared for their invasion of Sicily, the American airborne divisions had become something entirely new. A mobile, self-contained army capable of striking hundreds of miles behind enemy lines, capturing towns, holding them under fire, and paving the way for conventional forces. German intelligence finally recognized the danger. A May 1943 OKW assessment warned, "Enemy airborne forces constitute a significant and growing threat. Recommend strengthening anti-aircraft defenses in all vital sectors." But even this warning underestimated the scale. German planners thought in terms of brigades. American commanders were thinking in terms of divisions. A brigade could seize a bridge. A division could seize an entire city and hold it. And when American paratroopers finally descended over Sicily in July 1943, the Germans discovered too late what that truly meant. The age of the airborne army had arrived.
What made American paratroopers different from their German counterparts was not courage, both were equally brave, but a fundamental difference in culture and philosophy. The Wehrmacht was rooted in Prussian tradition, rigid hierarchy, meticulous planning, and centralized command. Initiative existed, but only within strict boundaries. When plans failed, German units often froze, awaiting new orders. It was a system built for precision, not chaos. The American military, by contrast, thrived on improvisation and initiative. Orders described what to achieve, not how to achieve it. If the plan broke down, adapt. If the commander was killed, the next man took charge. If supplies ran out, find another way. In airborne training, this mindset became doctrine. Chaos was not feared, it was rehearsed. Recruits practiced scattered landings, broken chains of command, lost radios, and missing supplies. Every soldier learned to think like a leader. Machine gunners could serve as riflemen. Riflemen could operate radios. Everyone could assume command if needed. The central principle was simple. Someone must always be able to move the mission forward. German intelligence officers were bewildered by this. After D-Day, Obergefreiter Franz Steiner of the 352nd Infantry Division analyzed captured reports and concluded, American paratroopers do not wait for orders. They do not mass before attacking. Their command structure is fluid. Small groups act independently toward the sound of battle. What appears to be chaos is in fact a flexible system of organization. That insight captured the essence of the difference. German troops began with a plan and tried to force reality to match it. Americans began with reality and adapted their plan to fit it. This flexibility magnified their effectiveness. A small, aggressive American squad could achieve the same results as a larger, slower German unit dependent on centralized control. Their equipment reflected this independence. Each paratrooper carried roughly 65 kilograms of gear, a T-50 parachute and reserve, an M1 Garand rifle with 120 rounds, grenades, an anti-tank mine, 3 days of rations, canteens, medical kit, and tools. Specialists carried even more. Bar gunners hefted 20-pound rifles, bazooka teams carried disassembled launchers, and radio operators bore 35-pound SCR-300 sets. Once on the ground, resupply was uncertain. Survival depended on what each man could carry and what he could improvise. The mental preparation was as demanding as the physical. Paratroopers knew that after landing, they would be scattered, disoriented, and surrounded by the enemy. The solution drilled into them was aggression. Do not hide. Do not wait. Move toward the fight. Gather any man you find and attack. This mindset gave them a psychological edge. German defenders accustomed to predictable tactics were unnerved by enemies who appeared from nowhere, attacked immediately, and vanished again. Major General Maxwell D. Taylor of the 101st Airborne Division summarized it best. We do not jump to raid, we jump to hold, we jump to conquer. By 1944, America had turned airborne warfare into a doctrine of conquest, supported by thousands of aircraft, tens of thousands of paratroopers, and a culture that celebrated initiative over obedience. The Wehrmacht would soon learn the cost of underestimating that philosophy in the skies of Normandy and the fields of Europe.
Private Joseph Carter of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment sat in the vibrating belly of a C-47 Skytrain surrounded by 17 other paratroopers. Most were young, nervous, and making their first combat jump. For the U.S. Army, it was the first combat drop in the European theater. That night, 3,400 men of the 82nd Airborne Division were flying towards Sicily. Their mission was to seize the high ground near Gela before dawn, paving the way for amphibious landings scheduled at 0245 hours. On paper, it was a flawless plan. In the air, it became chaos. Over the dark waters of the Mediterranean, strong winds tore through the formations. Navigation errors sent planes miles off course. German anti-aircraft batteries erupted along the coast, their tracer rounds cutting fiery lines through the night. Then, tragedy struck. The nervous gunners aboard Allied naval vessels, mistaking the C-47s for enemy bombers, opened fire. 23 transports were shot down. 410 paratroopers were killed or wounded before even touching the ground. Those who survived found themselves scattered across 60 miles of enemy-held territory. By German standards, where discipline and precision defined every maneuver, it was a disaster. By American standards, where initiative and adaptation were the hallmarks of success, it was a mission already underway. At 0200 hours on July 10th, Oberst Karl Heilmann, commander of Fallschirmjäger Regiment 1, began receiving confused reports. Paratroopers sighted near Victoria, more near Santa Cruz, others around Nishemi. His staff plotted the sightings, assuming they represented small raids of perhaps 200 men. In truth, there were more than 3,000 Americans on the ground, and they were moving in every direction. As dawn broke, German patrols ran into small, aggressive American units, 2 men at a crossroads, 5 moving along a ridge, 8 attacking a supply truck. They fought independently, instinctively converging toward the sound of battle. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Gorham of the 505th landed 30 miles off target with only 6 men. Instead of retreating, he advanced toward the fighting, gathering stragglers as he went. By midday, he commanded 115 men from 5 different companies. They seized a key junction and repelled 3 German counterattacks. German diaries reveal growing confusion. Gefreiter Franz Stongenberg wrote, "American paratroopers are everywhere, but not in formation. 10 on one side of the road, 15 on the other. No front line. Every fight is close and unpredictable." This chaos was by design. In the U.S. Airborne, leadership was fluid. If an officer fell, the sergeant led. If the sergeant was gone, the corporal took over. Every man was trained to think and act independently. The doctrine was clear. Keep moving, attack, and never wait for orders. General Fridolin von Senger und Etterlin, commander of 14th Panzerkorps, reported the effect with alarm. Enemy paratroopers create disorder disproportionate to their actual numbers. They strike command posts, supply convoys, and communication lines. They coordinate through action, not through orders. They cannot be cleared systematically because they refuse to remain static. The Americans were not fighting along fixed fronts. They were fighting everywhere. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Krauss of the 505th landed near Biazo Ridge, 25 miles off target with only 9 men. He could have waited to regroup. Instead, he attacked a German artillery battery shelling the beaches at Gela. 10 men against 50. At 0430 hours, they struck from the darkness, destroying 5 guns by 0500. German survivors reported a company-sized attack. In truth, only 8 Americans had hit them. These overestimates repeated across Sicily. German companies believed they were facing battalions. Battalions believed they were under assault by entire divisions. By noon on July 10th, Axis intelligence concluded that 2 full American airborne divisions were in action. The actual number was closer to 3,000 scattered men, chaotic but deadly. Brigadier General James M. Gavin, the 82nd Airborne's deputy commander, landed 35 miles from his designated drop zone with 20 men, no maps, no radios, no vehicles. Most commanders would have gone into hiding. Gavin moved toward Gela, gathering troops along the way. By midday, he had 250 paratroopers from multiple regiments. They occupied Biazo Ridge, the high ground dominating the landing beaches. When German Tiger tanks counterattacked, Gavin's anti-tank defense consisted of handheld bazookas and crude gammon grenades, canvas bags of plastic explosive. The fight raged for 8 hours. 2 Tigers were destroyed at point-blank range. 3 armored assaults failed. When the 1st Infantry Division finally linked up at 1600 hours, Gavin's men were exhausted, low on ammunition, but still holding the ridge. Oberst Hans Kochel of Panzergrenadier Regiment 33, who had led 2 failed assaults there, wrote, "American paratroopers exhibit extreme aggressiveness. They engage armor at close range. They do not retreat under artillery fire. Morale appears fanatical."
The term fanatical appeared repeatedly in German reports. They could not comprehend how these scattered, outnumbered soldiers continued fighting with such determination. The answer was simple. American culture rewarded initiative. If the plan failed, make a new one. If leadership collapsed, lead yourself. By July 12th, the Gila beachhead was secure. The 82nd Airborne had lost 229 killed, 410 wounded, and 141 missing, nearly a quarter of its strength. Any other army might have withdrawn such a battered unit. Instead, the paratroopers celebrated victory. They had seized the vital terrain, delayed German reinforcements, and prevented counterattacks that could have driven the Allies into the sea. Lieutenant General George S. Patton recorded the truth in his diary. Without the paratroopers, we would have been pushed back into the sea at Gila. They made the difference between defeat and victory. For the Germans, Sicily was an awakening. They realized the Americans could drop thousands of troops behind their lines, and those troops could fight as independent, self-sustaining units. Their industrial might ensured they could replace losses quickly and strike again. Generalfeldmarschall Albert Kesselring, commander of German forces in the Mediterranean, reported to Berlin, "Enemy airborne forces possess significant operational capability. They are able to deploy brigade-sized formations in our rear. Personnel demonstrate extraordinary initiative and aggressiveness. Defensive planning must assume airborne attacks are possible at any time, anywhere." The warning was sound but incomplete. German planners still thought in terms of brigades. The Americans were already preparing to drop entire divisions. Sicily proved that 3,400 scattered paratroopers could paralyze an entire German corps. The next time they jumped, when 13,000 descended together over Normandy, the shock to the Wehrmacht would be absolute. The lessons of Sicily were absorbed, dissected, and transformed into doctrine with remarkable speed. Between July 1943 and June 1944, American airborne planners worked tirelessly to fix what had gone wrong and amplify what had worked. Navigation procedures were overhauled. Pathfinder teams were created to jump in ahead of the main force and mark drop zones with radar beacons, colored lights, and panels visible even under moonlight. Pilots, once barely trained in night formation flying, now underwent months of low-level navigation exercises. C-47 Skytrains were fitted with improved compasses, radio altimeters, and Rebecca Eureka radar systems. The chaos of Sicily had shown what uncoordinated drops could achieve despite disaster. The coming year would prove what coordinated drops could accomplish when everything went right. By spring 1944, Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied France, was taking shape. Airborne forces would spearhead the assault, securing the flanks of the invasion beaches, cutting off German reinforcements, and sowing confusion deep in the enemy rear. It would be a test not just of planning, but of the new American doctrine born in blood and fire over Sicily. The night of June 5, 1944, saw the largest airborne armada in human history take flight. Over 800 C-47 aircraft carried the paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions across the English Channel. Another 100 planes towed Waco CG-4A gliders, laden with artillery, jeeps, and engineers. Simultaneously, the British 6th Airborne Division took off for the eastern flank of the invasion front.
In total, nearly 25,000 Allied paratroopers and glider troops would descend behind German coastal defenses before dawn, tasked with seizing bridges, crossroads, and key terrain. For the Germans in Normandy, it was the beginning of a nightmare. At 0103 hours, June 6th, the headquarters of General-Lieutenant Wilhelm Falle, commander of the 91st Air Landing Division, was jarred awake by the sound of droning engines. His operations officer burst into the Château de Bernaville, shouting, "Multiple formations approaching from the northwest." Falle assumed it was a routine bombing raid. The Allies had been hammering northern France for months. He ordered his staff to take cover. Moments later, the sky opened, not with bombs, but with parachutes. At 0116 hours, the first men of the 505th Paratrooper Infantry Regiment hit the ground around Sainte-Mère-Église. Ironically, it was the same regiment that had been scattered across Sicily almost a year earlier. This time, they landed almost exactly where they were supposed to. Pathfinder teams had marked the drop zones with radar beacons that guided the transports through cloud and flak. Among the jumpers was Lieutenant Colonel Edward Krauss, the same officer who had attacked a German artillery battery in Sicily with only 9 men. Now he commanded the 3rd Battalion, better equipped, better trained, and ready for a larger fight. By 0230 hours, Krauss's paratroopers had seized the town center. By 0345 hours, they had cleared the outskirts. As dawn lit the sky, they raised an American flag over the church square, the first liberated town in France. At 0430 hours, General Falle, unaware the town was lost, tried to reach his headquarters. His staff car drove straight into an American roadblock. The paratroopers opened fire, killing Falle instantly. The first German general to die on D-Day. The decapitation of his division's command crippled German coordination just as the invasion began.
The pattern repeated across Normandy. The 101st Airborne Division, landing further south near the causeways from Utah Beach, encountered high winds and scattered drops. But the scattering didn't paralyze them, it multiplied their presence. Major General Maxwell Taylor, the division commander, landed 3 miles from his intended zone with 6 men. The first soldier he encountered was a private from another regiment. "Where are we, sir?" the private asked. Taylor checked his map and compass. "Somewhere near Carentan," he replied, hearing gunfire in the distance. "That's where we're going." The private nodded, loading his rifle. "Then let's find the fight." That brief exchange encapsulated the entire American airborne philosophy. Wherever you land, however scattered you are, move toward the sound of battle. By dawn, roughly 13,000 American paratroopers were scattered across the Cotentin Peninsula. Only about 40% had landed on or near their planned zones. The rest were miles off target, but instead of disorder, the result was an explosion of independent initiative. Oberst Friedrich August von der Heydt, commanding the German 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, later wrote, "The enemy does not waste time forming large units. Small groups of 3 to 5 men attack immediately, blocking roads and ambushing patrols. They create the illusion of entire battalions operating everywhere at once." The illusion was so effective that German reports wildly inflated the paratroopers' strength. At first, they estimated a few thousand men. By midday, they reported 2 full American airborne divisions in their rear areas. They were right. At 0630 hours, the first wave of landing craft carrying the 4th Infantry Division touched down at Utah Beach. They expected fierce resistance. Instead, they encountered minimal opposition because the airborne divisions had already done their work. Bridges were blown. Roads were blocked. German columns trying to reach the coast ran into ambushes, mines, and sniper fire. By the time the first beach assault troops moved inland, American paratroopers were already there, securing causeways and crossroads. The difference between Utah Beach and Omaha Beach could not have been starker. Behind Omaha, where no paratroopers had dropped, German reinforcements reached the defenses quickly. American casualties there topped 2,000 in the first hours. Behind Utah, the airborne had delayed or destroyed nearly every counterattack. Total casualties? Fewer,
than 200. Generaloberst Friedrich Dahlmann, commanding German's 7th Army, received a flood of frantic reports. Sainte-Mère-Église lost, Carentan under attack, Chef du Pont, bridges destroyed, Saint-Côme-du-Mont, roadblocks everywhere. He tried to make sense of it. The arithmetic was grim. 2 American divisions, 13,000 men had landed behind his lines and were tearing the peninsula apart. It was the nightmare scenario German planners had feared since Crete, and now it was real.
At 1800 hours, Generalleutnant Erich Marx ordered a counterattack to retake Sainte-Mère-Église. The 1058th Grenadier Regiment, supported by Panzer IV tanks, would strike at dawn on June 7th. On paper, it was sound. In practice, it was suicide. The German column ran into a fortified town, not a disorganized group of paratroopers. Krause's battalion had spent the night digging in, laying mines, setting up interlocking machine gun fire, and coordinating naval gunfire from destroyers off the coast. The counterattack collapsed within hours. 5 Panzer IV tanks were destroyed. 200 German infantry were killed or wounded. The survivors fell back in disorder. Gefreiter Herbert Neumann, who survived the assault, later wrote, "We expected to brush aside a few disorganized paratroopers. Instead, we attacked a fortress that seemed prepared for weeks. Their fire was precise, their coordination seamless. It was madness." The speed of American organization astonished German officers. A drop at 0100 hours, a functioning fortified defense by 400 hours. By noon, an integrated perimeter capable of withstanding regimental assaults. At 1400 hours, Major General Matthew Ridgway arrived and established the 82nd Airborne Division's command post right in Sainte-Mère-Église. 13 hours after the first jump, a cohesive division existed where chaos had once reigned. Radios were operating. Medics had set up aid stations. Supply drops were coordinated. Patrols were probing outward. The German experience on Crete had been the opposite. Days of confusion, lost units, and crippling casualties. The Americans, by contrast, had turned chaos into order at lightning speed. By June 8th, both American airborne divisions had transitioned from defense to offense. The 82nd blocked German reinforcements east of Sainte-Mère-Église. The 101st held the causeways and advanced toward Carentan, the key to linking Utah and Omaha beaches. Men who had prepared for 2 days of isolated survival were now spearheading the Allied advance inland. General Omar Bradley, commanding 1st Army, noted in his journal on June 9th, "The airborne troops exceeded all expectations. They not only achieved their D-Day missions, they advanced beyond them. Their initiative and morale have been decisive." For German commanders, Normandy confirmed their worst fear. American airborne warfare had matured. What had begun as a chaotic experiment over Sicily had evolved into a precise, large-scale, and devastatingly effective instrument of war. On June 10th, the German High Command issued a directive to all fronts. The enemy is capable of deploying large airborne formations at any time and location. All sectors must prepare to repel airborne landings without warning. The warning was logical. It was also futile. Because while the Germans were preparing to defend against one airborne division, the Allies were already planning to drop an entire airborne army, 3 divisions at once, deep behind enemy lines in the Netherlands. That next leap, codenamed Operation Martin Garden, would show the world the full power and the terrible risks of airborne warfare on a continental scale.
September 17, 1944, 13:15 hours, over the Netherlands. Private Kurt Gable of the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment looked through the open door of his C-47 Dakota at a patchwork of Dutch fields far below. Beneath him stretched the greatest airborne armada ever assembled, more than 1,500 transports, 478 gliders carrying jeeps and guns, and over 20,000 paratroopers in the first wave. Another 15,000 would follow. This was Operation Market Garden, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's audacious gamble to end the war by Christmas. 3 airborne divisions would drop along a narrow 64-mile corridor from the Belgian border to Arnhem. Their task? Seize bridges over rivers and canals, hold until British XXX Corps advanced from the south, and open a gateway into Germany's Ruhr industrial region. The plan was bold, perhaps reckless. At Osterbeek, just outside Arnhem, Generalfeldmarschall Walter Model, commander of German Army Group B, was eating lunch when the sky filled with parachutes. Shocked, he ran outside as canopies blossomed almost directly above his headquarters. Within minutes, he was fleeing under fire, radioing Berlin at 14:15 hours. Large-scale airborne operation in progress. Estimate 3 divisions along Eindhoven, Nijmegen, Arnhem axis. Intent clear. Seize bridges for armored thrust toward the Ruhr. Model grasped the Allied aim instantly, and also their oversight. Resting near Arnhem were the battered but dangerous 9th and 10th SS Panzer divisions. Though reduced to a fraction of their former strength, they remained veteran armored units positioned exactly where the British intended to land. The Americans fared better. The 101st Airborne Division dropped near Eindhoven to secure canal bridges in the town itself. The landings were accurate, assembly swift, and by nightfall most objectives were held. Eindhoven was liberated within 18 hours, its streets erupting with cheering civilians, flowers, and bottles of wine. North of them, the 82nd Airborne Division descended near Nijmegen. Their mission, capture the vast Wall River Bridge. Organization was smooth, but German resistance fierce. For 3 days, they fought through snipers, artillery, and armored counterattacks before a desperate daylight assault. Men paddling across the river in flimsy canvas boats under direct fire finally seized the bridge intact. Both U.S. divisions achieved success through speed and improvisation, hallmarks of American airborne tactics in Sicily. The British 1st Airborne Division, however, landed into a nightmare. Fearing flak, planners had placed their drop zones 8 miles west of Arnhem, farther from the objective than any previous major operation. The paratroopers would have to march those 8 miles through enemy-held territory, and waiting for them were the SS Panzers. SS Obersturmbannführer Walter Harzer, commanding the 9th SS Panzer Division, could muster barely 2,500 effective men and 20 operational tanks. Yet he reacted instantly. By mid-afternoon on the 17th, his reconnaissance units were already intercepting British advance routes. By evening, armored roadblocks strangled every approach to Arnhem. Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, leading the 2nd Paratrooper Battalion, fought through and reached the northern end of the Arnhem Bridge at about 20:15 hours with 750 men. They dug in among the surrounding houses, determined to hold until relief arrived from the rest of the division or from XXX Corps coming up the road from the south. That relief never came. German armor cut off the remaining battalions west of the city. What should have been a quick march became days of brutal street fighting. Frost's men at the bridge endured relentless bombardment, dwindling ammunition, and mounting casualties, but refused to surrender.
On September 19th, SS Hauptsturmführer Victor Graebner led 22 armored cars in a reckless charge across the bridge, hoping to smash through by surprise. The British held their fire until the column reached the center span, then unleashed a storm from 3 sides. Within half an hour, a dozen German vehicles burned fiercely. Graebner was killed. His wrecked convoy blocked the bridge he had sought to retake. SS Sturmbannführer Ludwig Spindler recorded in his diary, "Every building is a fortress. Every British soldier fights to his last round. I have spent 3 years on the Eastern Front and never seen such stubborn resistance." But courage could not overcome numbers. 700 men against 2 divisions, with no resupply and no hope. On September 21st, after 4 days, Frost's battalion was finally crushed. Barely 100 were still standing. The bridge fell back into German hands. Elsewhere, the rest of the division was trapped in a shrinking pocket around Osterbeek, holding out another week while 30 Corps inched forward along a single elevated road, constantly ambushed and delayed. On the night of September 25th, after 9 days of fighting, the survivors were ordered to withdraw across the Rhine. Of more than 10,000 who had jumped, only 2,163 escaped. Operation Martingarten had failed. The Allies held part of the corridor, but not the final bridge, the one that mattered. German commanders viewed the outcome with mixed feelings.
They had blunted a massive airborne strike, yet were shaken by its scale and by Allied persistence. In his report to the High Command, Generalfeldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt wrote, "Enemy operation unprecedented in scope. In the south, execution excellent. In the center, very good. In the north, failure due to unfavorable drop zones and our rapid reaction. The British division destroyed, but their endurance extraordinary. The Americans fulfilled all tasks assigned." Allied losses across the operation reached roughly 17%, heavy, yet sustainable. By contrast, German paratroopers on Crete in 1941 had lost over a third of their men, ending large-scale German airborne ambitions forever. The difference lay in industrial strength. The U.S. 101st and 82nd regained full combat readiness within 2 months. The British rebuilt their division from the surviving cadre. Germany could not replace what it lost. Oberst Friedrich von der Heydte, a veteran Fallschirmjäger officer who had fought in Normandy, wrote privately that October, "We held Arnhem, and it cost us dearly. The British fought like lions. Had their tanks arrived on time, they would have won. Most importantly, the Allies can lose a division and make another. We cannot. This arithmetic decides wars." That arithmetic soon proved fatal. In December 1944, Germany launched its last major offensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge, and burned its remaining fuel in a bid to split the Allies. When it failed, the Reich had no reserves left. By March 1945, the Allies returned to the airborne gamble one last time. Operation Varsity, the largest single-day airborne assault in history, dropped 16,000 paratroopers across the Rhine into Germany itself, this time with overwhelming ground support. For the paratroopers who survived Arnhem, Bastogne, and the Rhine, one truth had become clear. They were no longer mere raiders or shock troops. They were the Allies' elite heavy infantry, capable of holding ground, seizing bridges, and standing toe-to-toe with the Wehrmacht's best. Martin Garden had failed strategically, but its legacy endured. In courage, in endurance, and in the quiet professionalism of the airborne soldiers who, against impossible odds, held a bridge too far.
Major General Maxwell D. Taylor, commander of the 101st Airborne Division, was in Washington attending staff meetings when the German Army launched its massive surprise winter offensive through the Ardennes. The attack, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, was intended to split the Allied front, capture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. In Taylor's absence, command fell to Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, a calm, pragmatic officer with a dry sense of humor. That morning, he received an urgent order from 1st Army Headquarters: move the entire division immediately to the town of Bastogne. Bastogne was small, just a modest Belgian crossroads, but its road network made it strategically priceless. 7 major routes converged there. If Bastogne fell, German armor could drive west unopposed. If it held, the entire offensive would choke in the snow. The 101st had only recently returned from the disaster at Arnhem. The men were resting, re-equipping, and badly under strength. Heavy weapons were in depots, winter gear was scarce, many soldiers were on leave. But there was no time to wait. McAuliffe scraped together about 11,000 men, borrowed trucks from every available unit, and began the overnight move north. They arrived in Bastogne on December 19th, just ahead of advancing German tanks. For the German High Command, their arrival was a bitter surprise. The XL 47th Panzer Corps under General der Panzertruppe Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz expected to brush aside supply units and scattered infantry. Instead, they found an entire airborne division, battle-hardened, aggressive, and famously stubborn. Von Luttwitz commanded overwhelming strength. The 2nd Panzer Division, Panzerlehr Division, and the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, a total of about 45,000 men and 300 tanks. Against them stood 11,000 paratroopers with no armor, little artillery, and limited supplies. On paper, it wasn't a battle. It was an execution. But within 24 hours, the situation turned. By December 20th, Bastogne was completely surrounded. Every road in and out was cut. The 101st was alone, low on ammunition, short on food, and fighting in snow and sub-zero temperatures without proper winter clothing. The Germans tightened the ring, confident that surrender would come quickly. They didn't yet understand who they were facing. Colonel Robert Sink, commander of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, called his company leaders into a snow-filled foxhole. His orders were simple: dig deep, conserve ammo, fire only when you can hit. Reinforcements are coming. We hold this ground. That same night, the paratroopers began turning Bastogne into a fortress. Every house became a bunker, every street corner a firing position. Machine guns were placed to create interlocking fields of fire. Bazooka teams set up ambushes along likely tank routes. Frozen earth was hacked into trenches with entrenching tools and bare hands. On December 21st, the Germans launched their first coordinated assault. Tanks from the 2nd Panzer Division attacked from the north, Panzerlehr from the south, and Volksgrenadiers from the east. Artillery pounded the town relentlessly, but the paratroopers held. Gefreiter Helmut Rietzke of Panzerlehr described the attack in his diary. We advanced with 10 tanks and 2 companies of grenadiers. The Americans waited until we were within 50 meters, then opened fire with everything. In 15 minutes, 5 of our tanks were destroyed, 60 men killed or wounded. We captured no ground. The Americans did not retreat. They did not surrender. They destroyed us and remained where they were. It wasn't just defense. It was defiance. Paratroopers counterattacked at night, raiding German positions, sabotaging guns, and ambushing supply trucks. The 101st fought with the same offensive instinct that had defined every airborne operation from Normandy onward. By December 22nd, after 2 days of failure, von Lüttwitz sent a delegation under a white flag. They carried a formal ultimatum demanding surrender to spare unnecessary bloodshed.
McAuliffe read the document, smiled faintly, and scribbled a one-word reply: nuts. When the bewildered German officer asked for clarification, Colonel Joseph Harper explained bluntly, "It means go to hell." The words spread like wildfire around the perimeter. Frozen, exhausted men laughed for the first time in days. If their general could tell the Germans to go to hell, they could hold another day. The next morning, December 23rd, dawned clear. The clouds that had grounded Allied aircraft for days finally broke. From the west came the roar of hundreds of C-47s from 9th Troop Carrier Command, the same aircraft that had dropped the division over Normandy. They came through flak-filled skies and released their cargoes over Bastogne, 144 tons of ammunition, food, and medical supplies. Drop accuracy was nearly perfect. Men cheered as crates fell from the sky, landing right inside their defensive lines. To the watching Germans, it was surreal. The garrison they thought doomed was being resupplied in daylight, in full view of enemy lines. For a Wehrmacht already starving for fuel and ammunition, such logistics were beyond imagining. Oberst Heinz Kokott, commander of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, wrote that evening, "The enemy is supplied by air despite our fire. Morale remains high despite complete encirclement. Our attacks are repulsed with heavy losses. Recommend bypassing Bastogne." But Bastogne couldn't be bypassed. Its roads were the arteries of the German advance. If the Americans held the hub, German tanks would run out of fuel before reaching the Meuse. Von Lüttwitz had no choice but to continue. Christmas Day, 1944. Snow covered the battlefield in silence. Then the air thundered. P-47 Thunderbolts from the 9th Air Force streaked overhead, dropping bombs, rockets, and napalm on German positions. Tanks burned, columns scattered. Inside Bastogne, paratroopers huddled around small fires, eating their meager rations of K-bars and tinned meat. Chaplains held mass in ruined churches.
One officer remarked, "It's the best Christmas I ever had, because I know what we're fighting for." The following day, December 26th, the rumble of engines echoed from the south. At 1650 hours, lead tanks from Lieutenant Colonel Abrams' 37th Tank Battalion, part of Patton's Third Army, broke through German lines and entered Bastogne. The siege was over. The 1st Airborne had held out for 7 days against impossible odds. 2,000 casualties sustained, but the town intact. German losses were catastrophic. Nearly 15,000 men killed, wounded, or captured, and dozens of tanks destroyed. German General von Lüttwitz reported to Berlin, "Attacks against Bastogne discontinued. Losses excessive. Enemy paratroopers displayed defensive capability unprecedented in any infantry formation encountered. Their resistance altered the entire operational situation." He was right. Had Bastogne fallen on December 20th, German armor would have rolled westward unopposed. Fuel and ammunition could have reached the front. The offensive might have continued for weeks. Instead, the German spearhead died in the snow. General Oberst Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations Staff at OKW, summarized the German realization. "Bastogne demonstrates that American airborne forces are the Allies' finest troops. Their training, morale, and leadership make them nearly unbeatable in defense. Our failure to capture a single town defended by one division against 3 of our own encapsulates the failure of the entire Ardennes offensive." In pure numbers, 11,000 paratroopers had tied down 45,000 attackers with 300 tanks for 7 days, a ratio of nearly 1-4. But beyond numbers was reputation. German troops learned that facing the 101st Airborne meant a fight to the death. Reputation became a weapon. Fear slowed attacks. Hesitation cost time. Time favored defenders. And each failed assault drained German strength further. After Bastogne, the 101st Airborne was no longer merely an elite unit. It was a legend. The final test would come in March 1945, when Operation Varsity, the largest single-day airborne assault in history, dropped 16,000 Allied paratroopers across the Rhine River into Germany itself. By then, the outcome was inevitable. The lessons written in blood at Normandy, Nijmegen, and Bastogne had reshaped warfare. And for the Wehrmacht, Bastogne was the final, brutal confirmation. The American paratrooper did not raid, did not retreat, and did not surrender. He held his ground until victory. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.